Hello, Facebook family and friends. I hope you are having a wonderful, lovely Friday. It's beautiful out right now. I'm actually sitting in my kitchen. I'm at a kitchen table and looking outside, and it's just such a gorgeous day. It was a bit cloudy this morning, but I hope all of you are watching my Facebook page this morning. I have an amazing guest that I'm going to bring on in just a minute, but if you were paying attention to my post this morning, we launched Operation Childcare. So for those of you who know me, you know that early childhood education is extremely important to me, and I've been a longtime advocate. And our preschool that my mom opened back in 2014, and actually when my mom passed away in 2018, I, having a nonprofit experience, was asked by the board to come on and continue her legacy. So we actually closed for 2 weeks when the pandemic when the shutdown and stay-at-home order first started. But then there was clarification given to us from the state that said that we were essential workers. And boy, did I realize how much the childcare industry and providers really were needed. So we opened back up, and we're currently serving the essential workforce. And we're so lucky and blessed to be able to do so. But what we're finding is we're now finding it very difficult to find supplies needed to keep preschool clean. So whether it's hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, Lysol, all of those items that help keep our facilities clean and children safe, it's very hard to find. So we launched Operation Childcare to collect donations so that we can donate these types of supplies to other childcare providers, because our healthcare professionals, our first responders, are the people stocking our grocery stores, need childcare, and we need to make sure that we are helping them, and we can do this through donations. You can make those donations at KHTS, and scroll down on my Facebook page to get that address for that. But I'm so lucky and blessed to have the next guest that I'm going to bring on, Pastor David Hegg from Grace Baptist Community Church here in Santa Clarita. Let me bring Pastor Hegg on. Pastor Hegg, hi.
Hey, hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you for asking.
Great.
It's, this COVID-19, I hear from a lot of my friends who are saying that they have so much time on their hands, and I'm like, I have less time.
For sure.
Everything is longer. Everything takes longer, and everything's done virtually, hence why we're meeting like this today.
Right.
But you know what? I'm still blessed. I'm blessed to be busy, because if I wasn't busy, I'd be probably complaining about that too. So thanks for coming on.
Sure.
I reached out to you a couple weeks ago through a mutual friend of ours, and I've been looking for a pastor to come on to talk about worship during COVID-19, but also to talk about the church and politics, which they say never to put those two words together, right? And even growing up as a Christian, like I can't really remember a time where my pastors have spoke about politics at the pulpit ever. So even trying to find a pastor to come on to do this from their personal perspective has been very difficult. And thank you for coming on. We're going to get into that in just a second. But I do want to talk to you about COVID-19 and about how it has affected your church and your congregation. Give us some insight.
Well, it's really affected everything, hasn't it? Because so much of any kind of organization is being together. And so when we realized that we wanted to make sure that we were good examples of what our community should be, as leaders, we said, you know what, we want to love our neighbors. That's where it started. We want to love our neighbors. We want to obey the regulations that are coming down from our leaders. This is not a time for civil disobedience or any of those kinds of things. Because if we love one another, love our neighbors, our neighborhood, our city, our valley, we're going to want to make sure that we do everything we can to keep this COVID virus from spreading. Right. And we also have a lot of first responders in our church. Mm-hmm. And my son is a firefighter, and he's going into homes and doing aid calls. And, one of the things we also understood as leaders is that we want to make our first responders as safe as possible by cutting down on the possible number of aid calls they have to go on. So
Right.
for all those reasons, I want to, respect what our leaders are asking us and loving our neighbors. We early on took a stand that said, okay, we're going to do away with our gatherings, even when they said we could do it in terms of 250 and then 50. We just decided we're going to record. We have the resources and the personnel. We got a great staff in the technological area. And yet, not being together is tough. So we adopted a strategy we call being aggressively present while physically distant. And that means that we're calling everybody in our church at least every other week, making sure the 2,500 families or more know that somebody's here. We're finding a lot of needs. Our congregation has been really, really generous, and we have we've been able to meet financial needs and physical needs. And for instance, we were out of flour, and I mentioned it to somebody, and a couple more friends down the line found 10 pounds of flour and dropped it off on our porch last night. So we are a community that takes care of each other. And it's not just with content. We're doing video devotionals every morning. The pastors and I, we're doing a service on Sunday. We did a service on Good Friday. We did sunrise service. We have music. It's all recorded and put together. And so we're actually finding that there are some things we're doing that we're going to keep doing because it really helps us be a family.
That's awesome. So I'm really glad to hear. It was actually one of my questions that I was going to ask is, churches are businesses too. They're God's business, but you have overhead, you have utilities, you have staff that you're paying. I've heard about some churches who have been applying for the PPP loans. Thankfully, VP Pence made that available for nonprofits and churches as well. It's much needed. But I'm glad to hear that that the church has been generous, whether it's financially or just through helping with bringing flour. But I do want, if people wanted to make a donation to Grace Baptist, how could they do that?
Yeah, you just, our website, gracebaptist.org, and there's a give button, and they can go on our app. They can give right through the website. They can designate it to the care fund or to the general fund. And we're thankful. We believe God's going to provide everything we need. We decided not to apply for the PPP. We wanted it, it asked that we, in good faith, say we have a great need. Well, yeah, we have needs, but we think that there are probably small businesses that are going to be in much greater need than we are. And we're just trying to love people that we don't even know. So God is supplying our needs for now. We are paying our staff. We're trying to keep them busy, doing various things they've never done before, like care for people and run errands. So we're doing well.
Right. And maybe even get some of those church projects you've been thinking about on that list, huh? Done as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, this is I'm a Christian. I was very fortunate to have been introduced to the church or been born into the church, really. And my entire life, I've been used to going to church, to Sunday service. Not everyone, has that path to Christ. Some people find church and at different moments in their lives. And whether it's through, a friend or actually going to service, I feel like this time when people are forced to be at home, when people are the most lonely or the most scared, that it may be difficult for people to connect and to find Christ. And I know that that's the Holy Spirit's job and we plant the seed, but what advice would you give to that person that may be watching this video, tomorrow or right now, on how they're feeling right now and what they can do to bring some joy and life back into their heart or soul?
In situations like this, I remember, when 9/11 happened, when any huge tragedy comes into our lives, the idea that we are in control really is out the window. And the more we realize we live in a world that is, it's risky, It is unpredictable. That tragedy happens. As human beings, we try and say, what's not going to happen to me? But it happens. And especially this one where we are at home and people have lost their jobs and they're wondering if they can find meat and bread and all those things. And then anytime they go anywhere, they're afraid that somehow the mail that they just picked up has virus on it. And more we realize we're not in control. And that can be devastating for people, especially if they turn to things that are harmful in order to kind of give them some sense of normalcy. And so what we find is that there's 4 big questions, the real questions of life. Where did I come from? Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And if we just really ask those questions, what we're going to find out is that we need God. Where we came from, why we're here, where we're going, and who we are all come back to something that's bigger than us. And so, I think there are people right now who are lost. They don't know a year or a month from now if they're going to have a job, if they're going to be able to feed their families. We realize that the unemployment is growing exponentially, and we realize that the government is a bottomless pit of money. So they're looking and they're saying suddenly connection with other people is important, but maybe there's even a connection that's bigger than that. And there is, and it's with God, the God of the Bible, who said, I'm going to take care of you, but I also have rules that you should live by, and you don't. That's called sin. But I've taken care of that too. I sent my son into the world to take the penalty that you couldn't pay, to give you a life you could never live apart from him. So, that's what we do as churches. We did it during the Saga shooting. We've done it during the fires. We've had people, that we've taken care of because their houses burned down in Malibu and stuff like that. We feed people, but primarily what we're trying to do is show them that through our love, they can know the love of God that is found in Jesus Christ. And, don't wait. If you're listening to this and you've got some struggles, gracebaptist.org, go there to our website. You can leave a message for me. We will reach out to you and help you in any way we can.
Right. And for any of you out there listening, even if you feel that little tiny tug or that little tiny question, feed that, water that, and reach out, because that's God.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's just a whisper. So now to get to the church and politics. I've never heard the terms together. I have heard the terms. You don't hear the terms together often. And when you and I first spoke, and I've had this conversation with several pastors that I've known, for the longest time, pastors have refused to get involved and talk about politics or political issues at the pulpit. Sometimes they may talk, those issues outside of the church, but why is that? Why, where does that fear, and it may not be fear, that may be the wrong word, stem from? And why do we not see it happening?
Well, I think there's 3 reasons that a lot of guys are afraid to do it. Number one, it's because some guys have done it and they've looked foolish. By that, we have some guys who go for a political candidate and they say this person is, the next coming of Jesus Christ. And if we don't elect him, the country's going down the hill. And I think everybody sees through that. I have a very high standard for myself, for integrity, for honesty, for transparency. And quite frankly, a lot of times it's hard for us as pastors to find a candidate that fits that. Okay. And so when we see some guys go too far, like there's a guy down in Texas who is pretty sure that every Republican walks on water. And we're just, once you do that, I think whether you're a Democrat doing it for a Democrat or whatever, I'm not trying to be politically party oriented here, but once you do that, people see, wait a minute, if you're endorsing a guy who can't live up to the standards that you would want for a man who was going to marry your daughter, then what else are you wrong about? So that's number one. Number two, I think on the other end of the spectrum, there are those who are ready to pounce on any pastor who does anything that supports an agenda that they don't think is right. This whole idea of the separation of church and state from Jefferson's letter, which was never meant to be seen as the isolation of the church from the state. It's just that we don't have a state church in America. That was the founders' perspective. But it's always been the case that the political leaders had a responsibility to lead the nation in terms of integrity and honesty and morality. And the preachers, those who understand the Bible and preach the Bible winsomely and rightly, we are the conscience of the nation. And so there should be a very symbiotic relationship between the political leaders and the religious leaders. We should not see ourselves as separate, but rather as teammates. But
Right.
anytime we have tried to be teammates in the past, there have always been those who will, say things about you, and a lot of pastors just don't want that. Third thing is that, quite frankly, there are some pastors who don't want to take a stand on anything that might be controversial because their whole goal in life is to fill as many seats as many times as they can. So you have guys who won't come out against abortion, even though they don't believe in it, even though they know it's wrong. You have guys who won't come out against this ridiculous notion that there's more than two genders, even though, science and DNA specifically says so. You have all of these social issues that many men will not come out, or women won't come out with a position, because there might be some who are going to hold it against them and will never come to their church. Well, I'm not here for people to flood Grace Baptist with their presence. I'm here to represent Jesus Christ fairly, the Bible fairly and winsomely and warmly and pastorally, because I believe that the power of our worldview is the Word of God. The Spirit of God uses the Word of God to do the work of God in people's lives. That's what we do at Grace Baptist. We love people, but for the purpose of getting them to have their lives aligned with what God says is their best option. And that's what Scripture holds.
So have you been able to implement, just talking, I know there's two components, right? There is supporting candidates. And I think that's probably the more difficult of the two. The other being talking about the issues, talking about, abortion, or even, sex education in public school. There's a variety of issues that pastors don't like to talk about, but those are more specific, right? Because you can, I would think, more easily talk about those issues and align them to your Christian values while you're talking about them, versus talking about or supporting a candidate that is multi-layered, right? That candidate may support different issues or have different opinions. So have you been able to talk about, I know that you have endorsed, and actually let's talk about this really quickly. You have endorsed Mike Garcia for Congress, who I just voted for today. I put my mail in the ballot. You did too. Can you tell me about what led you to specifically choosing for the first time ever to endorse a candidate, and specifically Mike? What led you to that?
Well, I would imagine that in some ways, I'm one of those pastors who is so focused on what I'm doing that a lot of times politics just becomes kind of a thorn in my side. It happens every 2 years, and I get asked all the time, because we have a fairly large congregation, hey, can I meet with you? Would you endorse me? And I rarely do, simply because I want to maintain my integrity. I mean, who I endorse is going to make a difference as to who people see us as. I represent Grace Baptist Church. But in this case, when Katie Hill was elected, which was a great surprise to us, because our very conservative valley was kind of taken by surprise with the ballot harvesting, and she won, and we never thought she would. And then she went to Washington, D.C. and represented a lifestyle, not only issues, but an actual morality that is anything but representative, even of those probably who voted for her. I don't think anybody who voted for her said, hey, go to Washington, D.C., be immoral, be a horrible representative of the valley that you claim to represent. And that kind of woke a lot of us up. So I became very interested in who was going to be a representative that would represent, the basic morality that I think our valley has. So I had been hearing about Mike Garcia. I did some research on my own, realized he was a normal guy. He'd been in business. went to the service academy. His parents-in-law go to Grace, and I called him up. I think I emailed him, and I said, "Hey, can we have lunch?" And we met for lunch, just he and I, for about 2 hours. And I asked him all the questions, the questions that weren't just about issues, but were about him. And he did a great job. And so I said, you know what, anything I can do to help you. I've held some forums for him with pastors and other church leaders at our church. I put up signs. I've done a couple of pastoral calls with him on Zoom. And so, everybody I'm talking to, I'm saying, look, let's think integrity. And when we hire somebody, we have 150, 120 some employees at Grace Baptist. We have 4 C's. Character's number one. If character's not number one, the rest doesn't matter. Then there's competency. And then there's chemistry. Is it somebody that we wouldn't mind having lunch with? Can we get along with them? Right. And then lastly, capacity. And so when I look at those 4 things and I run a candidate through that grid, I was really impressed with Mike's transparency. I think his integrity is above reproach. Nobody's perfect, but he's a guy. So, and the other thing is, I think a lot of us have been scared that somehow we were going to be called on the carpet by the community, by the liberals in the community, who didn't think that churches should get involved. And the Pacific Justice League has done a good job of holding a couple of webinars. I went to a seminar that they held in person with Mr. Dacus, and he explained to us all the things that we can do. And so I am much more open to doing those things now that I understand I'm not putting Grace Baptist at risk in terms of, some kind of law or rule. So I think it's time for pastors to stand up and not go further than they should, but to say, this is what the Bible says. By the way, one last thing I'll say, at Grace Baptist, we not only have a doctrinal statement of belief, but we have a social values statement. And it's on our website. And if you want to know what we think about creation, about life, about marriage, and it's all positive. It's all about what we think it is, not just what we don't think it should be. And so we have equipped our people to be able to talk about these issues this way.
So how would you encourage, whether it is a parishioner at another church or a pastor, how would you encourage them to get involved, to start, talking about political issues as they align with their values and the church's values? Because it can be scary for a lot of people.
Well, the first thing is, I just think we have a lot of uninformed, not invested voters. I mean, you're the politicians who said, I'm not. I'm just I'm a theologian and a bit of a social critic.
Official.
I look out and I see that especially the younger generation has given up on politics. And so they're not invested unless there's a cause. They're very much cause oriented. We see that at Grace in terms of giving. People my age were taught, you give a certain amount out of every check and it's just, you do it. The younger generation is cause oriented. Put a cause in front of them and they'll go on their phones and they'll send you, some money. Same thing is true. They're very apathetic about politics because, quite frankly, they don't see it working. They see a lot of, adversarial situations between the two parties. It really is hard. And so what I think we have to do is we have to let people know, again, I'm just going to repeat myself. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor. And then Jesus changed that. And he said, I want you to love one another as I've loved you sacrificially. So if you love God and you understand who he is and you want to be right with him and do right by him, then you're going to look at your neighborhood and you're going to say, okay, I am charged as a Christ follower to provide the best environment I can for our people to thrive. And that means early childhood education. It means funding. It means values. And I think the values are pretty simple: honesty, integrity, family, chastity, purity, all of those things. And I think if Christians will just read a little bit, and I tell the people at Grace, hey, if you want to know how to vote, I will tell you, I will run your life. You come, and I have scores of people who have asked for my recommendations. I put together a sheet for the last election. This election's pretty short. It's Mike Garcia, but they asked for that. I sent it out. I've talked to people. Yeah, because I think I'm loving our neighborhood when I do that. And it also means that I'm going to love our opponents. Okay? It means that, you know,
Right.
if they disagree with me, you're going to win more friends with honey than you are with lemon, right? So we
Right.
want to be collegial, we want to be ironic, and we want to good neighbors.
So we do have a question on Facebook, and I'm going to read through it. It's kind of long, but you may be able to answer at least part of it. It is from David Gonzalez, and he says, in a society that likes to clump religion together, how do we defend our faith against generalism? We see congregations still holding services in spite of stay-at-home orders, but not all churches are, as for lack of a better word, irresponsible. How do we defend that? I mean, do we even have to defend that?
Well, it looks like he's asking for two questions. Religion is a general term, but not all religions are the same.
Right.
And I would start off on the basis of the religion or biblical worldview I have says this: there is a God who created all things and who's in charge of all things, and before whom everyone is accountable. We have all broken His law, but He sent His Son. The whole story of salvation is God's grace extended to us in His Son, and it's a yes or no decision. You either believe that Jesus Christ is God the Son incarnate, who died in our place and for our benefit, who rose from the dead, who sits at the right hand of God, and He's coming again, which means we better be ready when He comes. If you don't believe that, then I would say you're not really a biblical Christ follower, regardless of what your mouth says, and more importantly, what your life does. If you don't line with that. The other question there I think he's asking is about those churches that have decided to continue having services. And I would, I understand the reason behind it, because they consider that proximity is essential to being the church. I stand against that. If the Apostle Paul was not part of the church when he was in prison, then we have a big problem. Proximity is not what creates the church. Our unity is found because every Christ follower is united with Christ. And in Christ, that's Paul's phrase, we are united with every other Christ follower. Now, do we long to be together? Yes, absolutely. Because the body knows it's functioning best when it's together. We're in a unique time right now. And those churches that continue to meet, I just think it is irresponsible. I think it's unloving. I think it's selfish. And I think they're not caring well for their neighborhood. And I think the grand example is the guy down in Louisiana who trumpeted that they were going to continue meeting. And then a few weeks later, he died of the virus. I mean, it's sad. It's sick.
I didn't
but
hear about that.
Yeah, it ought to stand as a monument to us to say, look, unless the government asks us to do something that in doing it, we break God's law,
Right.
We should come under the government, even if we don't like it, as long as we're not sinning by obeying.
Right. As he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and what is to mine to what is mine. And even though that they were talking specifically about taxes, it's government, right?
Yeah. And, there are a lot of things that the California state government and local governments do that I wouldn't agree with. But this is not a time for that. I think Governor Newsom is making some tough decisions. I think he's trying to protect our people. I'm for that. I didn't vote for him, but this is not a time to hold something against somebody else. This is the other thing. I hate it when politicians never miss an opportunity to denigrate their opposition using any kind of event, especially those that are catastrophic. Whose fault is this? Come on. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. People are dying. Let's do what we can to keep people from being exposed.
Right. And I think it's our job right now as Christians to love one another. And part of loving one another is protecting one another by doing the right thing, which is staying at home, doing all of the things that the professionals have asked us to do to stay safe. Lastly, this is more of like a personal question for me. So this, past week was Easter, and Charlotte, my daughter, is 3, and she's very, we've introduced her to the church. She's always telling me, Mom, Jesus is in my heart, and she looks for him sometimes. It's really cute. But on Easter, I was like, it's Easter, Jesus has risen from the dead. And she looks at me, she's like, Jesus died? And I was like, oh man, my heart broke a little bit, because I'm like, I said, he conquered death. That was my answer. But as a mom, there's going to be that point where it kills me, but it's, his sacrifice and what he did is very sad and heartbreaking, but it's what brought us our salvation. Charlotte is my only child. How do I, as a mom, find the appropriate ways to articulate our faith to her that's appropriate for a 3-year-old?
Yeah, I mean, I've had 3 3-year-olds of my own. Well, 2 more if you count our granddaughters, who are now 8 and 10. I think what I found best and what I tell parents to do is use as much of the biblical story as you can. I think, for instance, we had a Good Friday service, and Good Friday is only good because Sunday's coming.
Yeah.
Because the other thing we have to realize is I think it starts off with who Jesus really is. He's not a junior varsity God. He's not just God the Father's ambassador. He is God, a very God. I mean, he shares one essence with the Father. He has one set of attributes with the Father. It's God the Father and God the Son. And so when he comes, he came knowing that the incarnational mission demanded that since mankind had created a debt of sin, a man had to pay it. And so the death of Christ, rather than seeing it only as agony, and by the way, we're never, like the book of John has one verse on the death. It doesn't talk about his agony. It talks about his love for us, right? He loved us so much that he did what we could never do. And I think if we point to the cross as a picture of God's amazing love for us, sacrificial love, he gave himself for us that he might bring us to God, Peter says in 1 Peter. I think that gives the kids an understanding from early on that he wasn't just a man who got caught and the Jews and the Romans, put him on the cross. No, our sin put him on the cross, and God's love raised him back up. And that's a story of victory, a story of triumph rather than failure, which it wasn't.
Right.
Maybe that helped.
It did. And I'm just so thankful for even the experience of being a mother and a parent, because now when you realize that God gave his only begotten son as a parent, and now gets to, you're like, whoa. And, sometimes it takes that loving experience to really, in human form, understand the intensity of that love.
Yeah, I have a son. He's a 31-year-old firefighter, and he goes into homes and helps people that can't breathe. And my wife and I pray for him every day, and the rest of our kids, because he basically is giving his life right now for other people. And it's a picture. It's a great picture.
Well, I just lost you, but that's okay. Oh, you're back. Okay.
Sorry.
You've been on for about 33 minutes. That was an amazingly short time, but felt like an amazing time. I just want to thank you so much for jumping on. Before we get off, I want to talk just one minute. I hear you wrote a book called Appointed to Preach.
Yes.
And can you just give us, a synopsis on why you wrote that and where we can find it?
Yeah, first you can go to my website, davidwhegg.com. All my books are there. I have 4 books out right now. That was the first one. Appointed to Preach was actually part of my doctoral dissertation. And it's about what qualifies somebody to become a pastor. It's about ordination, and it looks at the way through the Bible where God appointed the Levites, and he appointed the disciples, he appointed the apostles, and tries to actually, it's for a young man who says, I think I want to be a preacher. Well, this is what it takes, what it looks like. I also wrote a book called The Obedience Option, which says this, that true faith is always believing that what God has for me through obedience is better than anything else. And then another one I wrote had to do with persecution. It's called The Privilege of Persecution. It's about what we can learn from the persecuted church. And then the latest one is called When My Heart is Faint. and it's based on a psalm that says, when I am down in the depths and my heart is faint, I find a rock that's higher than I. And it's all about what to do when you're struggling. So those are all at davidwhegg.com. Thanks for asking.
No problem. Well, Pastor Hegg, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. I will see you soon.
Great. Thanks.
So everyone, thanks for joining in. We did go a little long today, but we had some amazing conversation with Pastor David Hegg from Grace Baptist Church here in Santa Clarita. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.